So I'm Sean Picorni. Thanks for joining us for this week's research conference. And this week we have Dr. Geeta Swamy, who's talking about research without walls. And Dr. Swamy is the Vice Chair for Research and Faculty Development in the Department of ObGyn. Her critical role in that position is strategic development and administration of the department's basic translational and clinical research programs, as well as faculty development at all levels. She's dedicated her career to advancing research in women's health and mentoring faculty and trainees. She's a nationally recognized leader in the field of maternal immunization and vaccination in pregnancy. She has ongoing research that's funded by the NIH, the CDC, and the EPA. She has served in roles as the chair of the IRB and then as Associate Dean for Clinical Research for Regulatory Oversight and Research Initiatives, and most recently was promoted to the Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Research for the School of Medicine. So we're very fortunate to be joined by her today for her talk on research without walls. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. My kids are in something called Chapel Hill Social, which is like Cotillion Light, and they have homework every week. And one of the homework assignments this week was actually learn how to take a compliment and give compliments. So when I listen to that, I'm sitting here going, oh God, when they'll stop saying those things. But thank you, and it does actually have some some sense that maybe I have done something good for the world in public health and so forth in my time at Duke, which has been really appreciated, so thank you. So let's see if I go forward. Great. So I did want to point out, I did throw Adrian's name on here. I'm sure I don't need to give any introductions for Adrian, but if there are any errors on the slides or any issues or something you don't like, you can contact Adrian. I didn't keep his Twitter handle on here, but I'm sure you know how to find him if that's the case. But the slide deck and the sort of sentiment are a collaboration of the work that we have ongoing in the School of Medicine and sort of our perspective of where things are now. So I throw up this number, and in some of you, Adrian has presented some of these slides in other venues, so if you know what this is, don't jump the gun on the other people, but does anybody know what this number represents? 740,000. Remember, we're talking about clinical research, so any ideas? So. Thank you, Eric, so much. I'll make sure to point that down. That was recorded, right? I can send that up to the dean. Say that one more time? Yeah, so it's a number of individuals who come into Duke Health, okay? So how about this number? So that is the number of covered lives or individuals who actually participate in clinical research here at Duke. So it's you could say that that's good, that we have hopefully brought the potential for benefit or advancing health for about 15,000 individuals. You could also look at that and say that somewhere around 98% of the individuals that are coming to Duke really aren't getting access to that or potentially having the benefit of our work from that perspective. Depends on which way you want to look at it and how we can actually do better, because I think we certainly can do better than a 2% sort of rate of that. So what is the participation gap? Where does that come from and why is it happening? So if you look at this data that was taken from public willingness to participate in clinical trials, for whatever reason, I think we can probably guess what some of them are. North America fares a little bit better than some of the other countries and certainly the overall, but that number, 93% who indicate participating in clinical trials would be a good thing, doesn't nearly equate right with the 2% number that we have enrolled in clinical trials. So a study that you very likely know about because there's activity going on obviously here at DCRI with the adaptable study is something that is has embarked on been planning for many years and has had a very strong advocacy component from patients to be a part of the study planning and part of the implementation. And so this is a picture of the folks who are the adaptable adapters or individuals who are sort of proponents or champions for the study. So maybe we should be thinking about how we could do better, not just from where we sit inside places like DCRI or inside places like at Duke, at our computers and clicking out what IRB protocols look like and consent forms, but really going to the people and asking them how we could actually do a better job of bringing things to them. So what are some of the global themes that we know about would be important in research to individuals? So there's got to be some level of value, right, that participants or that patients or individuals see when they think about research. Certainly there has to be some level of efficiency. If we keep doing this slowly, costly, never get around to completion, then it becomes a problem. We certainly think that there's importance in quality, regardless of what we're talking about, right? This is not just in research. If we don't have quality metrics across all the work we do, then it devalues our efforts and our attempts. I think the approach that's different, though, from what I think no one would argue with these first three components, but really thinking from a patient perspective or a person-centeredness perspective on research participation. Not just that, oh, Dr. So-and-so is conducting a trial and you're eligible for the study, but say, are you actually interested in research? Do you know about research that's ongoing at Duke? Do you know about research findings? Not even participating in a trial, but do you know about research findings that might be important to your health or to your welfare? How do we deal with the ginormous amounts of data, especially in this time where individuals are dealing with things like Facebook and gaps in data, in hacking, and so forth. Also, how do we use all the data to be better at efficiently using that information rather than just relying on simple CRFs that we fill out at each study visit? And trust. I think trust is clearly an issue we've known about for many years in the research world as well as in the healthcare industry, right? So we know if physicians and providers that are providing care are not in a trustworthy situation, that patients really may end up making some of the wrong decisions. I'm always amazed at those surveys that show that the people that are most trusted in the healthcare sort of industry are pharmacists. And if you look at those over and over again, the pharmacists range higher in trustworthiness than physicians. So why is that, right? Because they actually take time, right? They answer questions, they talk to them about what they know about risk benefits and so forth. They also are not pressured, right? They don't have a 5-minute, 15-minute visit window they have to do. And we've all stood in line, right, at CVS or Harris Teeter waiting, and there's a line of people. But when you get up there, you're able to ask all the questions you want, right? It's not like the clinic appointment where you've got to turn over and the physician or providers are running into those sort of issues. So I think these are global themes that you could actually move across healthcare as well as healthcare research. And I'm going to come back to why I think that's important, that we need to think about integrating those two and not really siloing or separating them. So this is actually data from a couple of years ago looking at the increasing costs of research. And what you can see here is that the bottom figures show the R&D price index for biomedical research and development. But the green lines and the black dotted lines show the total grant cost per patient index, or the mean of that. And you can see that they're both increasing, but certainly not increasing at the right rate. So at some point, we are going to eliminate the ability to actually conduct clinical research if we continue at this rate. So what do we know are some of the problems that are leading to that? So certainly there are high costs, and the slower the results that we get to, the higher those costs will be, right? Because we continue at a run rate of using the same amount of money to try to get the same number of patients, to try to conduct the same amount of research. We all know about funding challenges. That's no different regardless of where you are, but these are things that have certainly led to increasing costs because now we're trying to always sort of fill gaps. We don't want to get rid of good research staff, good research investigators, so how do we cover those costs in between? And then you end up charging more so that you can back cover costs during those gaps. We, despite the fact I wear a regulatory hat, I will be the first one to tell you that complying with regulations is definitely problematic and difficult, especially when those regulations keep changing, especially when those regulations come from multiple entities. The fact that we have different informed consent requirements from the Code of Federal Regulations, different compared to FDA, does not make it easy. It means that individuals who are involved in this need to know about all of those things. We have significantly fragmented infrastructure, not just at a local level, but certainly at a national and a global level because of some of the things I just mentioned. Data is difficult, right, to transfer. We do not have, even in Epic, which is now one of the leading electronic health record systems out there, what one cell means in our system in Epic doesn't necessarily equate with what it means in another health system. But then we get into issues of IP and who's setting things up and so forth. But those are things we really have to overcome. We would argue that we really have because of funding gaps, because of all these challenges, we have a dwindling a dwindling sort of pool of qualified investigators and qualified research teams. It's getting harder and harder for clinician scientists to maintain the scientist part of their work. And as we see people either retire or move over to clinical work only, which is certainly happening, and I'm sure you've experienced it with investigators you've probably worked with, those are people that are often hard to replace with the same experience and knowledge.
And as I mentioned already, we need to work seriously on our willing participants and how we not only reach them, but how we help others to become part of that pool of willingness. So what else do we know from the outside perspective of research, not just how we're conducting it and enrolling patients and so forth, but there has been a lot of press, some good, some not so good, about what we know has happened with research dollars. As you probably have heard, I hope, there are a lot of things going on here at Duke, which I'm not going to focus on today, but many things that we're addressing and dealing with concerns that have been raised by NIH about how we're managing research, how we're overseeing research, how we're managing grant dollars. But we know, and specifically from directly coming down from Francis Collins, from NIH, from FDA, about the unfortunate use of much of the taxpayer dollars and how they have not gone to positive research or really significant findings that we can move forward. We were just talking about this book, and actually I will give Adrian one more credit point. He gave me this book as a Christmas present. I'm not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, because I started to read it and it just made me depressed over the Christmas holidays when I was trying to go skiing and whatnot. So it is, Rigor Mortis is actually a book that really talks a lot about sloppy science. And the reason I say that it's depressing is because it makes you realize in the stories that are directly about the research, right? I can lay out for you here and say that billions of dollars have been misspent, but then when you actually read the works where people have tried to reproduce results, where people look at laboratory data showing that cell lines that they've been using for years and named it something is actually the same cell line that they're using in multiple other research studies. So clearly we're not on the same target. It's disconcerting, right? But clearly, I'm not saying this to be negative. I want us to think about how we can move this forward and overcome some of those things. And what that means is we can't do sloppy work. We really have to do the best work that we can and try to integrate integrity into everything that we do. The other thing is that we're not the only game in town anymore, right? So certainly we know that private practitioners have picked up with industry-sponsored studies, and they often are very good at enrolling in studies because they have often a more significant relationship with their patients than we do sometimes in the specialty world. But in addition to that, there's a lot more players in the game, right? So social media, Facebook, you might have seen recently that, even Warren Buffett is getting into the healthcare industry. And so this is not a time where we can really sit back and just think, oh, because we're Duke or because we're DCRI or because we've had relationships with, company A, B, C, and D, that they're going to keep coming. That we can just sit back and say, because we did such a great job on that study 5 years ago, I'm sure that we're going to keep doing this. Because it's not only that they are looking at others, but they're also looking at others on how they might do it differently and how they might do it more efficiently and how they might do it for less cost. The other thing is we're really at a point where patients and people out in the community are going to be able to just go directly to get involved in research and bypass healthcare systems completely. And hopefully you've all seen that you're going to be able to now access your medical record on your iPhone. That's great, but then you look at it and say, well, how come we as research staff and investigators can't access that same medical record on the iPhone? We have to go through all kinds of sort of regulatory burdens to figure out how to access that information and keep it secure. Meanwhile, you can just put in your 4-digit code and get your own health record. So somewhere there's got to be a better connection in that. So I want to turn a little bit to what we actually have been working on here at Duke, and to Adrian's credit, as Sean was mentioning, last September, under our new dean, who I have incredibly fond thoughts of, having now worked for her for several months, and knowing that that's actually what she says is what she really means. Adrian and I and our teams have put together really what we're looking for as a mission and vision for clinical research at Duke. And what we really hope is that we can embark on a mission to catalyze and accelerate clinical research across the continuum with the goal of advancing health and knowledge. I think it would be hard to argue that that's not a good mission for us to have. But what's the vision that goes along with that? There's no reason that we can't be the leading academic health system, and I want to just throw in there that we're looking at this as a health system that leverages our resources and our operations to really try to improve the health, quality, and value of those outcomes. And how we see that, again, from some of the core values that may go back to some of the terms I had talked about earlier in global themes, is we want this to be people-centric. And that's meant to be broadly. It doesn't say patient-centric, it's people-centric. We're really open and honestly looking for people who want to be a part of something new and something maybe bigger than them that we can actually move forth in our research community. We want this to be collaborative. I actually think that in the almost 17 years I've been here at Duke, whenever I do interviews with fellow applicants or residency applicants and even new faculty, I actually think one of our biggest strengths is our ability to collaborate. You know, if you come to this campus and want to do research in X or want to start a new clinical initiative or program in Y, I guarantee you there is somebody, if not more than just one, who has similar thoughts or similar ideas or visions or has had some experience in that. And it is such a rich campus of faculty, of staff, of advisors, and so forth, that it's really something we should be continuing to leverage to move things forward. I can't say enough about what integrity means to research. You could put that word into anything you do. It doesn't matter if you work with data all day. It doesn't matter if you are face-to-face with patients and recruiting. It doesn't matter if your sole job is to submit grants through SPS and deal with the contracting office. But if you don't take the mindset that you are proud of this work, you feel that this work is directly going to impact individuals at not only this campus but across the health community, then you're mistaken, because it really is an important part of what we do every day. And I think most of us would say that we do feel that way, that we take great pride and integrity in what we do. But I want to commend you for that and remember and remind you to think that that actually is an important part of your commitment to being involved in the healthcare system as well. We want things to be innovative. You know, I showed you things with Mark Zuckerberg on there. We could say, you know, when he had the idea when he was at Harvard that he was way ahead of the curve, right, and innovative. I mean, certainly the start of Facebook was, but if you look at what they've done since the start, that's actually where the innovation has come, right? Who thought that a social media system to connect people to figure out where there's some new social event on Saturday would be what we were talking about, is where you could actually potentially access your health record information, right? So we want to make sure that we are bringing in all aspects of innovation into what we do. And there's no reason to shoot for anything other than being excellent and being the best that we can be. So that's great. Vision statements are excellent, right? They're good. They sort of get everybody pumped up. But how can we actually make that happen? And is it possible? Well, I'll tell you some reasons why it's going to have to be possible, okay? So if you look back in 2000, which my kids would say that was so old, like, you know, it was in the 1900s that you're talking about data coming from. There were approximately 5,800 hospitals, all right, in 2000. And in 2016, we actually aren't talking about number of hospitals anymore. We're talking about numbers of health systems. And likely the number of health systems is even going to decrease, right? You've already seen, if anybody's kept up with a lot of the physicians or providers in the room who've trained at other places, know that the things that are coming or sort of in the works in North Carolina have actually happened in many other states already, right? So if you look at Pennsylvania, I did my residency there. When I was there, the entire health system sort of an hospital system imploded in Philadelphia, sort of got built up in Pittsburgh, got redistributed to all sorts of companies, and now UPMC is a giant, right, across all of Pennsylvania and whatnot. Cleveland Clinic has similar models that have happened. And if you think that North Carolina is that's not going to happen, that we're different, we have all these academic centers, just watch, because it's coming, right? It's on the way. Now, I think where we can be different and make sure that things go according to how we'd like them to is be actively involved in that. And I can say that leadership in our health system certainly are doing that. There is data, right? I think what we have considered for data that's important to clinical research is really what we ask patients about, right? Fill out a symptom diary, have phone calls to talk about what their side effects might be. There's way more data than you could ever imagine collecting on a CRF. Not to mention that the majority of things that happen to patients happen to them outside of the health system. Right? We certainly can say that genetics play an important role, but the environment that you live in, your day-to-day activities, how you interact with the world is probably even more so important than anything that happens in a health system. And how do we actually get to that data and use it in a way that is useful and helpful for patients to not only advance their health, but help us to figure out what the next patient might need and what would be important for them. The same thing goes as sort of what I've been saying here is at the bottom you see what we talk about as participant contributed data. That makes sense, right? We're asking them things, we're taking their history, we're noting those things. Clinical test rate, like, what's their CBC? Did they have an EKG that was abnormal that we need to record? But then we get to things that are not as easy to identify or as easy to measure, but probably have the actual impact on what those results of clinical tests are, or what the participant reported data might be. What are their behaviors? What are their exposures? How do we look at things like microbiome and genomics and other omics platforms that I will stay out of and get the other experts in those areas to deal with? But how do you get all of that data into sort of a deep phenotype sort of scenario that you can actually tell this is what's happening to people and here's why and here's what we need to target to actually make things better? So what are the things that we have looked at as keys for our success in clinical research here at Duke? So the first are some of the major platform priorities. So they're the ongoing development or attempts to move things forward in a precision medicine approach. I mentioned things about deep phenotyping, and there are groups who are really embarking on things like machine learning, and I'll show you some of the things that Duke Forge is trying to do as well to help with that. Population health, there was a tremendous symposium, I think just 2 weeks ago now, on population health that was, I think, standing room only. And so clearly there is a big push on that front here at Duke. And how do we actually collaborate across our health systems? We've been looking at studies that we do here at Duke, where Duke is a site, but is it Duke University should only be the site? What about Duke Raleigh? What about Duke Regional? I mean, we're fooling ourselves if we think the only patients we should be researching are the ones here at Duke. So what are some other areas that we need to keep moving forward in? We need to have better engagement, and that is, I use that term broadly. It's not only engagement with our patients, but engagement with the community, so that individuals who are out there and eventually become patients are better attuned to what we think about research, how we implement research, and what it means to them. We need to have better tools for data science and informatics. And we need to think about whether we should be thinking of our health systems and other related practices in a larger network that we can access more readily or more efficiently than we might be doing now. It's important that we think some about academic entrepreneurship. I can give you an example. Geisinger Health in Pennsylvania has one of the leading biorepositories in the country. And you might think, who's Geisinger Health? Are they like on the map in an academic medical system sort of purview? Does NIH even fund them? Who are they? But they partnered with Regeneron to build out a huge sort of initiative at a biorepository that has essentially been, in the background backstopped by industry as a collaboration to move science forward for both industry and academia. And so now you've got a resource that investigators there can tap into that also shows a clear partnership with industry, which is something that I know DCRI has been probably the biggest proponent from an academic institution perspective about partnering with industry to do that. Clearly we need things at the top. coming from Duke Health. And as you probably have heard, there are many initiatives going on to push forth the concept of one Duke. Dean Klotman, Tom Owens in the health system, Chancellor Washington, even President Price and so forth. Like, we have heard this over and over again, and I can tell you that there is meaning to it in the background. The Board of Trustees has pushed forth for the concept of a one Duke mission. So if we do all of this from the perspective that we're part of the School of Medicine, and that's where research happens, Duke Health is where clinical care happens, we're not going to get there to overcome a lot of these inefficiencies and burdensome tasks, because we're sort of trying to do things in parallel, and we're always going to be stepping on each other's toes. If clinical care comes first, how do we get in to see the patients? If clinical care comes first, how do we get them to know about research? If they don't know about research, how does the healthcare ever become better, right? So you can see why we really need to have a more integrated mission across those two. And we have active conversations and engagement ongoing with leadership at the school and the health system level. So that's a good thing. So I mentioned the One Duke sort of mission. In addition, how do we become recognized as leaders, both from a local to national level or global, and then back to a local level? So how do we move that up the chain as well as back down the chain, sort of in a continuous cycle? And I mentioned the differences between clinical enterprise and the research engine and how we integrate those two. So what we really want is to advance health and discovery while we figure out what's needed, right, for tomorrow. So the bigger thing that we have had conversations with the health system is how we can actually get to something called a learning health unit or a learning health system. There's been a fair amount of discussion on this, workshops, even editorials, nice papers written in JAMA, New England Journal. But at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, you're like, how do you actually do it? How can we make this happen? It makes sense, right? So I can talk about my particular area of clinical, care and so forth, is that I'm an obstetrician. I take care of women during pregnancy that have either high-risk medical conditions or have a high-risk complication of pregnancy. In that unit on labor and delivery, so we have our clinic, which is linked to ultrasound radiology. We have our labor and delivery unit, which clearly we have to have contribution from obstetric anesthesia. We wouldn't be able to care for our patients if we didn't. We have to have clear partnerships with our neonatology group as well as the newborn nursery. So if I do research that is only in pregnant women, and I don't have any collaboration with OB anesthesia or any collaboration with pediatrics, how does that work? How do I get the data I need? How do I get the neonatologist to implement protocols to make sure all the infants are treated this similarly so that it's not their treatment variation that's impacting the results of our study where we're enrolling pregnant women looking at the outcome? So it would make better sense, right, if we function as a research unit, so to speak, across all of those entities. But that's not how we're aligned. Right, so research grants, research studies come into OBGYN, they come into anesthesia, they come into pediatrics. We don't really bring them into the health unit per se in the hospital. So how can we better align, say, a clinical service line with the clinical research? And of course, in the background, we're going to be nowhere if we can't get the data science that we need pulled from electronic health records rather than people going in and manually writing things down that is part of a CRF or that sort of thing. If we can get 80% of it out of the health record, then we can get that other 20%, right, and spend that time and reduce costs and improve efficiency. So this is Adrian's slide. So you can have these slides and you can read every single one of these numbers, because I look at it and I go, oh my God, don't follow the circle. You might get whiplash as you come back around. But it does actually go through really all of the stages and processes to get from one point all the way through to the end of how we can get from a clinical service unit, clinical research unit type of model to move to a sort of almost like a rapid cycle type of improvement process, but in research. So this is really helpful, but there's a lot of moving parts, right? So it's not something you can just easily do, oh, we're going to have a learning health unit. That's great, it's going to do. So I think that's a little bit of why, in my opinion, there's been a lot of things written about it, not necessarily a lot of easily implementable, successful displays of how that has worked. That doesn't mean we shouldn't embark on it and try to do it, but I think we need to be mindful of what we need to do to get there. So here's an example of how we would look to this from a data science perspective and how this might impact a learning health system and how we might learn information. So the idea here is that you take raw data from electronic health record, transform that into some sort of analytic approach, so that at any time you can apply that same process to analyze the data. So if you know about statistical coding, you take your preliminary data set, you set up your SAS code, in my days, right, or your R code now, and figure out, okay, here's the preliminary analysis. So then when I get the full data set, I can just apply that code back, right? But I have to do that. I have to sit and manually do that, get the data set, load that. What if you could just have that built in, right, into your electronic health record, connect those two, and that the results present themselves where people can see that. So you present it to the users, not just to the research investigator who then sits and massages it and writes it into a nice publication, presents it in a meeting and puts it out there. We know that it takes somewhere upwards of 7 to 11 years for clinicians to adopt changes in guidelines. That's entirely too slow if we have valid information to show that this is something we need to move forward with. So this is actually a model for what's going on right now with one of the Duke Connected Care programs that Duke Forge and DHI are helping to manage, where they're looking at deep care management of individuals trying to predict unplanned admissions. And they're taking that data and identifying individual patients who are at high risk for an unplanned admission, targeting what they can do from a case redesign effort to try to reduce that probability for that individual patient. So I want to talk about the clinical research as we see it here, so present, and then what we see as a future value. So currently we have very passive patient and clinical engagement, or clinician engagement. It's challenging to try to make every clinical encounter count to improve the next. We have a parallel track for research and clinical practice, and we often are rather inefficient in these one-off studies, right? So I know why it happens. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea that we contract with Pfizer to do study A, right? And then once they finish that, they come back and we contract to do study B. Why don't we have things like an open, master service agreement that says you're going to embark on this research platform for this drug, and we're ready and willing and able to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Obviously, there's amendments or addendums or whatnot, but why aren't we just ready and geared up to know what the timeline is? There's many reasons why. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but those are things that we should be thinking about to make a lot of this more efficient. So what we hope is that we can move to a stage where we have active engagement of patients and clinicians. There's a lot of things we need to do or get put in place to do that. How can we leverage real-world data and real-world evidence to support the decisions we do every day, like in that learning health model I showed you? We absolutely have to embed clinical research into routine clinical care. The fact that we still have a cold call policy that says if you're going to approach a patient from the research team, somebody on their clinical team has to introduce you. Why aren't we all on the same team, right? It would make sense that we're all there for the same purpose. Everyone wants this patient to do well. We don't want to enroll them in research that might compromise that, but we're not actually trying to do something that's any different than what the folks in the clinical system are trying to do. And how can we better share systems across the and information across the entire ecosystem of research and clinical care? So lastly, I want to touch on some of the things we are doing. All I'll say is put pen to paper on how we want to implement some of these things. The School of Medicine has a couple of strategic planning things going on, specifically related to research. So the dean, you may or may not remember, depends on how long you've been here at Duke, but Dean Andrews had put forth a strategic plan for the School of Medicine a few years back, which actually is still in place and still is the guiding document to sort of inform the overarching strategic plan for research. But I can give you an example. Like one of the tenets of the plan was to say, recruit and retain the best and brightest faculty and staff. Okay, that sounds great. We want that. Of course, we wouldn't argue that that's not a good idea, but how do you do it? how do you find them? How do you recruit them? What do we need to do to retain them? It can't be a one-off every time. It can't be that, oh, this person's really great, let's figure out what we need to keep them here. This person's really great, but I don't have a position, let me go find something. We should have a process. There should be a track where we're looking at this repeatedly, right, and serially to make sure we're doing those things. And that's just one example. There's many to go. So Dean Klopman actually initiated what we're calling a research planning phase instead of strategic plan, because there is the strategic plan. This is more about how to actually operationalize that. And there were 5 or 6 work groups now that I'll show you what the topics were. But this sort of planning phase started in January, and it's a pretty tight timeline. The plan is for it to be done in June. We are gathering a lot of that information and just had one of our last meetings in April before the final draft plan is released. And we will be working collectively in the school's leadership to figure out how to actually best communicate that to our stakeholders. These are actually the work groups of the Planning Committee. So there is one that is the Future of Clinical Research that has been led by, the work group has been led by Adrian and Heather Whitson, who's in the Center for Aging. The Medical and Engineering Convergence, one specifically focused on precision medicine, genetics, and genomics. Recruitment, which focuses on recruitment of faculty, physician scientists, and top-notch staff in both the clinical and basic science arena. The early translation group, which is really an attempt to try to focus how we move things from a T0 to T1 mindset. So from the standpoint of developing new drugs, new compounds, and moving that all the way into human trials. Donald McDonald and myself have led that group, but folks from the early phase research unit like Mickey Cohen-Wolkowitz and Jeff Guptill have been a part of that as well. And then an infrastructure team. And I'm sure that everyone is keenly aware of the fact that we are beginning to run out of space. So space is a clear issue in the needs of infrastructure, as well as things like IT support. You know, we're never going to be able to compete with Facebook if we don't get, advanced IT capabilities beyond just standard click and put something in email and use OneNote to keep track of things, right? We're going to have to move that into a much more innovative and sort of leading edge kind of ideas. So I just want to show you that there's been a lot of work that has gone into this sort of research planning committee, and you can see that there are clear goals that have been established. And I can't emphasize enough how much Dean Klopman and other leaders have interacted with, have come to this one Duke alignment concept across the enterprise. It isn't focused only on what you've heard about PDC and health system integration. This is really overarching across not only the health side, but also across campus as well. And there's a lot of things you see here that we've taken from those work groups and put forth into strategies, initiatives, and how we'll actually enable those things going forward. In addition to that, Adrian and I have been leading a sort of what we call strategic operations and planning group simultaneously with that. And some of the areas that we're focusing on is one, we haven't decided if this is an oxymoron yet or not, but what we call administrative simplicity. And what we're really trying to do is figure out how we can make our processes to study startup not only more efficient, but more transparent. And easier to understand. My kids were telling me about, I came in and I said something and they go, oh, well, that's just a TLA. And I said, what's a TLA? And I said, 3-letter acronym. I go, okay, so we have a 3-letter acronym for 3-letter acronym, right? So if you come in as a new faculty member or staff and someone goes, oh, you need to contact ORA to do that. Oh, no, that's ORC. Oh, no, that moved from one to the other. Oh, well, did you talk to the health IRB or the campus IRB? Oh, wait, did you talk to regulatory affairs? Well, that was when they were with DTMI, and you're like, who the heck is DTMI? Like, so, these are things that we throw around internally for people who have been around, and you can find those people because they'll tell you the history of how something was great and now it no longer exists, and that may be a good thing, maybe not so much. There might be some backstories, usually interesting conversation over a drink at the end of the day to find out all those things, but it shouldn't have to come to that, right, to figure out what you need to do. We need to figure out how to better integrate. I can guarantee you that there are strengths across every unit on this campus, and then there are weaknesses or gaps. Why aren't we leveraging those strengths to make each other better in what we do every day? And that certainly could help with efficiency as well. And then how do we come up with key metrics that can not only be easy to measure, but can help us to move things forward. So a lot of times people look at metrics or goal setting as some sort of performance evaluation, right? That's not the only use for metrics. Metrics are actually something we should be using to help us to know. But I'll argue with you that, to be honest, and do clinical research, there hasn't been a lot of push to actually establish good metrics because, to be quite clear, we haven't been able to get the right data in place to even measure the things we want to. I'm hopeful that that's going to change, particularly, let's say maybe around June or so, after we go live with the new IRIS and Encore implementation, where we will not only be able to measure things pretty effectively, but you will have direct insight into that data. It isn't that you have to send a query to Docker to ask for how many phase 3 studies do we have ongoing that are NIH funded, that are this, that, and the other. If they're in your portfolio, you should be able to see them. The other area of operational excellence is to really work on developing sort of a roadmap for common operations. So I look at the administrative simplicity group as being responsible for exposing, improving, continuing to monitor, continuing to improve over time, everything from inception of an idea to study startup. Okay? And then the operational group is really to pick it up from study startup and let's get it done. Let's get it done efficiently. Let's get it done with quality. And how can we also monitor that with key metrics? Now, I know all of you will agree that there's overlap between those two, right? Like there's got to be communication between those two. But at the same time, when you're trying to develop a work group, you've got to charge them with something to do. But these groups communicate pretty regularly together as we're trying to move things forward. We have an engagement and communications work stream as well. And the objectives on the engagement side are to really improve our engagement with our stakeholders, from the clinicians all the way to the participants, to develop an understanding of what research participation means and what experiences are. So right now we do a lot of research, we can't argue that, but how much research on research do we actually do? How well do we think we're doing with participant satisfaction of participating in a research study? Do we think they had a good experience? Do we think we had a bad experience? Do you think they know about the data demonstrating that individuals who participate in clinical trials actually have better outcomes of their health than the ones who don't? Are these things that we should be using to convince them to participate in studies? Doubtful. But are they things that they should still be aware of as part of their care? Probably, right? So how do we get them to understand that without it being part of, say, a consent form, right? Because right now that's actually our only direct communication with patients about research studies. And then we want to develop a roadmap of these of our commitments to research participants that we would move forth, such as things like developing an alumni network of people who have participated in research. I can give you a good example in the world, again, that I work in is we take care of a lot of women who deliver their babies early or, experience preterm birth. The NICU partnered with, then we partner with them. They have an alumni, session or meeting or sort of workshop once a year of graduates of the NICU. They've been doing that for the neonatology group for a long time. And we said, why don't we partner with you so that we can counsel these women or make sure they're aware of the fact that if they have another pregnancy, they should be coming in to see us early, because there are things now that we know about that we can do to prevent that in the future. So how can we do those things where we're leveraging some of that information to help engender the trust and the understanding for our patients that we actually do care about their health, not just that we enrolled one more person in the trial. Communications is something that I personally find a struggle with at this campus, and I like to say at this campus because I don't know. We can always say, well, at Duke it's like this, and at Duke it takes so long and whatever. Unless you've actually been to every campus and figured it out, I bet you there's a lot of similarities, right? But right now, the way I learn about things in research is I look at the funding newsletter. I look at the DCRI newsletter. I look at the Docker newsletter. I look at the CTSI newsletter. What is the One Duke newsletter? Do we have one? Do we have one place that we can go to talk about what's the latest, greatest thing in research research, or what are the new initiatives, and what are we moving forward with, we have to do better about that, right? Because email, I hate to say, is not really the best form of communication anymore. If it's, fallen down on my list of 20 emails, unlikely I'm actually going to take the time to read it, right? If it comes in at the right moment and I'm sitting with my coffee and I feel like I can take the 2 minutes to look at it, probably rises to the top, right? So we've got to figure out better strategies for that. And also make sure everybody knows about everything, or at least has the ability to know about everything. If you're not signed on to the Docker newsletter, you don't get it. Is that a good idea, or is that okay? Certainly, I guess people should have the choice to not get emails, but if that's alternative ways to do that, we should be thinking that way. And there is a big group focused on the use of My Research Home to utilize that for communications going forward. And this is, the teams here actually include a lot of the communicators across their School of Medicine communicator network, as well as on campus and Duke Health. And lastly, there is a group focused on strategic alliances and business development. How do we think about developing strategic framework to support alliances and partnerships with industry? Can we create a roadmap for development of those alliances so that, again, it's not just a one-off. It's a here's how we've done it, here's how we can do it the next time. Here are things we can put forth for industry and others outside of Duke that might look at and say, oh, Duke has done this. They must be interested. Maybe I should go talk to them about partnering as well. And I just want to focus in just on one more last thing I think I'm coming upon is Clinical Research Day or Clinical Science Day that's coming up in a few weeks. I'd really encourage you to come. We've put together what I think will be a really stellar panel of speakers, including Tom Insel, who was a former physician, at least in practice, and then was at Google Verily for some years and left to start his own company, and is really looking to how to move forward participant engagement and recruitment and so forth in more disruptive ways than what we would say is our sort of standard ability to enroll patients. What we hope to achieve on Clinical Sciences Day is to really celebrate our successes at Duke, expose people to sort of novel research approaches from what you'll see here in the speaker list, and to stimulate collaboration. So I really think it'll be a great afternoon and evening, and hope you can make it to that as well. Thanks a lot. Taking any questions. Don't make anything too hard. I'll just text Adrian if there's something.
Thank you for the great presentation. Your goals and everything you put forward are laudable. The missing link, however, is the clinician, and every major academic medical center struggles to understand how to incentivize and recognize clinicians to participate in site-based research.
Yeah.
It's not part of promotion and tenure.
Right.
They're not financially rewarded. They're actually financially rewarded to do more clinical work. So
That's right. Yeah.
what is Duke School of Medicine, the Duke Health System going to do to make it different and be the leading academic medical center in the country in this regard?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think a couple of things that we have discussed, that there is actually ongoing work to revise the promotion and tenure process, as well as components that sort of say get you credit, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're putting down. And the framework that has been put forth is old school academia, right? It's the how many talks did you give, how many grants do you have, how many publications did you, how many students did you mentor and train, and you're exactly right. If we're going to make this something that our hardworking clinicians can be proud of and be willing to assist with and participate, there has to be some carrot for them. So we have had conversations from that perspective. I think from the standpoint of a learning health unit, we have to get them involved. If there's something where we can put it more in the context of this is information that can also help you in your practice, hopefully that can be sort of seamless in what they're doing. But you're right, it's exactly how to directly compensate or show direct benefit for them or gain by helping to enroll participants is a tough one. We've had discussions. If you have ideas or thoughts on it, though, certainly convey those. I think.
So private health systems are developing research RVUs that recognize site-based research in the same way that a clinical RVU would be, which is very forward-thinking, but it's also a struggle for me to understand why private health systems can do this more adeptly than an academic center. So we absolutely have to be able to recognize participation in site-based research at the same numerical factor as clinical RVUs, and if we want to really be forward-thinking and make this work. And Are the leaders of the health system and the school discussing this, or is this on the table in any way?
Yeah, that has been brought up. I won't go as
As far
far
as to say we've figured out exactly how we can assign it, but yes, those discussions have come up. Yeah. Yes.
So I feel like I've kind of been to the State of the Union address because there's so many things that we wish we could do and that we want to do.
Yeah.
What would you say are the top 3 priorities?
So I think there's, so it depends on if you're looking at it at a strategic level or operations. And I'll tell you that in my mind, like I think operationally, I think logistics, like what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do Monday, right? And I can tell you that, so I actually am leading the groups on administrative simplicity and operations. And so we actually have real tasks at hand and work that we're going to put forth in those groups coming up probably by this summer. Some of them are going to be how we are going to provide metrics, scorecards, if you will, to CRUs, particularly about site-based research and how they are enrolling and recruiting. Also measuring our central offices on how they're doing. Everybody can have, the one-off story of, oh, my contract sat there for, 20 days. But if you look at the average, it's not so bad. So how do we, close those gaps and fill those items? I think the other area that's a really big focus is how do we make sure that we're recruiting and retaining experienced investigators and staff, because it is very clear to me now, having come up to a leadership level in the last few years, that losing one, so I have a situation in one of my offices where I have 2 people who have been at Duke for I think 34 and coming up on 40 years. I'm certain that replacing that person who's going to retire later this year after 40 years is not feasible with just one FTE, right? Because there's no way that her efficiency and her knowledge and whatnot will do that. I'm envious of her that she's going to retire, so she'd have that right to do that. But how do we better plan so that I'm not faced with that at the end of this year of having to replace her? Why weren't we able to hire somebody else, by May, who can cross-train and figure out those kind of things? So I think we have to be more forward-thinking in how we recruit, retain, and support our faculty and staff in making a lot of those things good. So those are, for me, 2 of the biggest things that I feel like centrally we really have to focus on doing. I think Sean up here.
So it was a great talk. One of the other things that I think is interesting is that not only is Duke a healthcare provider, but they're also a health insurer
Yes.
through Duke Select and self-insured of their employees. And I'm curious to hear how that integration, if there's any integration at all within the research infrastructure. I would think that there's a big incentive to incorporate that into the learning health system.
Yeah, so I would agree with you. So there has been very, very early discussions. That's what I would say. Probably not a lot that I can document for you or say that this is moving forward in an active way at the moment. I think a fair amount of this kind of activity has been, let's say, held up by this plan for integration, because a lot of that is going to directly impact what sort of influence we have, right, in that setting. But having said that, though, we've had those conversations with Tom Owens and with others in the health system leadership. We should be the R&D arm of Duke Health, right? So if they need to know something about their patients, they shouldn't be contracting with somebody outside of Duke. That doesn't make any sense. We've got world-leading experts here. So if I like to think if we turn it around, instead of saying, hey, we want to do these things with, the payers or Duke Select as the payer. Instead, we should maybe say, what do you want to know about your, person lives in here that we can sort of work towards and do that. And maybe if we think about what we bring to them, that might sort of change some of the discussion as well. Instead of saying the whole, like, well, you just want to do research on our patients, and that jeopardizes our coverage and our ability to pay and all those kind of things. So the conversations have started, just not, I think they'll be in progress, I think, for some time, though, to do that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Feel free to share slides if you guys do that or post whatever. I think, and again, if you see errors or problems, just contact Adrian or you can text him or whatnot. So thanks very much.